Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, I should say. Thank you for joining. We are now getting back to our class after a little hiatus because of Hanukkah. I hope everybody had enjoyed their Hanukkah, and latkes and donuts and everything. So we're going to get back into it. Of course, this class is in the merit of all the Jewish people, especially those in the land of Israel, those that need rescuing, those that need healing, those that need to be successful in their missions. God should be with them. We also want to thank all our sponsors and our partners. And we had this past week, we had our year-end fundraiser, and we appreciate everyone who donated, and we appreciate our partners. And if you'd like to sponsor this class is available for sponsorship. You can send us a message or a comment, and we would be happy to do that. And let's get into it. So this week's Torah portion starts off called Vayigash. Vayigash means that he approached. Just to give a little background, Joseph is reunited with his brothers, but they don't know it yet. Joseph invites his brothers to come back to buy food, as there was a famine in the whole world, and especially including the land of Canaan, where Yaakov and his sons lived. And there was food in Egypt, so he sends them to Joseph to go to Egypt. And he, of course, tells them, you can't come back unless you bring your brother Benjamin, his full brother from both his father and his mother. And Jacob does want. And in the last week's Torah portion, Jacob gives in. And he says, okay, we need food. So he goes, and this is where we pick up towards the end of last week's Torah portion. Genesis chapter 43, verse 8 and 9. And Yehuda says, Judah said to his father, send the boy with me, and we will get up. Oh, having some hearing issues. Can you hear now? I hope everyone could hear. If you could hear, please put a thumbs up. The microphone is on, plugged in. I'll go further. If there's any issues, please let me know. Okay. So Yehuda says to his father, Israel, send the boy with me, and we will get up and go, and we will live and not die, both we and you, and also our young children. Okay. We could hear good. Okay. So he says, essentially, let us go, let us take Benjamin, we'll go, and we will, and we'll survive because we'll have food. Then he says, I will guarantee him. From my hand you can demand him. If I do not bring him back to you and stand him before you, I will have sinned against you forever. Okay, so Judah goes to Israel, his father. Yehuda goes to Israel, and he says, I guarantee Binyamin's safe return. Now it doesn't work out because Joseph sets them up, right? He puts his goblet that he pretends that he's the sorcerer, and he puts this goblet that he uses for his sorcery. He puts it in the bag of Benjamin and Binyamin, and of course he sends them after them, and he catch them, and they say, okay. And this week's Torah portion of Vayigash, and he approaches, and Judah is approaching because he guaranteed to his father he's going to bring him back. And that's in this week's Torah portion. He goes through it, and he explains to Joseph the situation, that he guaranteed it. Now, when I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his soul is bound to the boy's soul, it will happen when he sees the boy is gone, he will die. In other words, that Jacob is going to die if Binyamin is not returned. Your servants will have brought down the gray head of your servant, our father, in sorrow to the grave. Your servant took responsibility for the boy, meaning Judah saying, I took responsibility for the boy, for my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, I will have sinned against my father forever. Please let your servant remain instead of the boy and a slave to my Lord, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I cannot bear to see the anguish that would befall my father. Okay, so this is the back and forth, and basically Judah is threatening Joseph that he is going to start a war with the country of Egypt if he doesn't get his brother back. And of course, Joseph is doing all this to see how, now that his brothers have repented against what they had done to him, they don't know that he's Joseph, of course, but he wants to see how do they react to a missing brother. Do they stand up for him? And of course, they pass the test, and he reveals himself to them. But this is a fascinating idea of guaranteeing something. And in fact, in the Talmud, Bava Basra, page 173, the Talmud says that if somebody is allowed to lend money using a guarantor. And the Talmud says, what does that mean you can use a guarantor? What is the scriptural basis for that? Where in the Torah does it say you're allowed to use a guarantor? So Amar Rav Huna says, Minayil Arav de Mishtabed. Where do we find the source that a guarantor has the financial responsibility to and can guarantee a loan? The verse says, I will guarantee him, from a hand you can demand him. So the Talmud, in the laws of financial law, quotes our Torah portion and says, that Judah guaranteed Binyamin's return. And we see further, not just in financial law, we see this in other places as well. Okay, the Torah says, each man. This is in Leviticus chapter 26, verse 37. Each man will stumble over his brother, fleeing as if from the sword, but without a pursuer. You will not be able to stand up against your enemies. So what does it mean? Stumble over his brother. Rashi explains they will trample each other when attempting to flee with all the commotion and confusion. Okay, so the Jewish people, when they're losing a war, they're going to trample over each other. And the Talmud explains it as follows. In Sanhedrin, page 27b, the Talmud explains further. Stumble over his brother, a man over the sins of his brother. In other words, if the Jewish people sin, then they will stumble over each other in war as well. This teaches us, and the Talmud continues, this teaches us that we are all responsible for one another. Kol Yisrael Arev Zelas. Every Jew is responsible for one another. Okay? And in the Medrash, so we see that again. So that's not just a financial thing. That's saying we're responsible for the sins of another person. And we continue in Leviticus, in the Medrash in Leviticus Rabbah, in Vayikra Rabbah, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, this is like people who are sitting on a ship. One of them took a drill and began drilling underneath him. His companions asked him, what are you doing? He replied, what does it matter to you? I'm drilling under my own seat. They responded, the water is rising and will flood the entire ship. So we see here that the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai uses this analogy of the man making a hole in his part of the ship, that what I do affects someone else. In other words, Jewish people are one unit. And the Ben Ish Chai, who was a rabbi in Baghdad, he also asked this similar question. He asked a very interesting question. It says in the liturgy of Yom Kippur, and we say, we have what's called the Vida, confession. And in the confession, we confess to like a standard amount of sins. There's no obligation that before Yom Kippur, which this might be a cool idea, right? You have to go on, you have to write down all the sins that you did over the year. And then the confession has to match, right? Maybe nowadays you can find an app for that. You enter your sins and it prints out for you a confession, right? Instead of saying, Ashamnu Baganu Gazalnu, you could say, I stole from Larry, I said something not nice about Benny, whatever. You can make a whole list, right? A very specific, no, we say a standard thing. So the question is, listen, with all due respect, I'm sure that I'm guilty of some of these things, but to say that I'm guilty of all of them, right? And even righteous people, even great rabbis, somebody who didn't sin the whole year has to say every single confession. And the question is why? So the Ben Ish Chai says as follows. It is written in Chesed La'alafim, one must recite all the various sins in the confessional prayers, even if they did not commit them. Why? Because all Jews are one body and are responsible for each other, especially if you could have protested the sin and instead remained silent. So the Ben Ish Chai takes it a step further. He explains that we are responsible for one another, and therefore, when a person says Ashanu Magano and he says the confession on Yom Kippur, or throughout the year, depending on your custom, he is saying it for all the Jewish people. Why are you responsible for them? Maybe you could have done something about it. One another source, Talmud, in the Talmud tractate Rosh Hashanah, page 29a, Ahava, the son of Rabbi Zera, taught regarding all blessings, even though one has already fulfilled their obligation, they can still fulfill the obligation of another. Okay, so Rabbi Abba, the son of Rabbi Zera, says that you can say a blessing even though a person already fulfilled the obligation. What is that referring to? Let's use the classic example. Let's say a person went to shul, went to synagogue, and after the services, they have a kiddush. And the person either made the kiddush for the congregation, or he listened to the kiddush and he had in mind to fulfill his obligation of hearing kiddush, and he participates in the kiddush, and they have a nice dinner or lunch, depending on the service, and he's finished his kiddush, then he goes home, and his wife and children are waiting for him. And they say, okay, let's make kiddush. What do you mean? How can I make kiddush again? Either I said it in synagogue, or I heard someone else say it and I fulfilled my obligation. How is it possible for me to fulfill to make this blessing again? I already said it. I already thank God for Shabbos. So this rabbi is saying in the Talmud, in the tractate Rosh Hashanah, you can. Because why? How is that possible? So Rashi has the same question. Rashi in the Talmud says, it's as follows: because Sharei Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lemitzvos. Every single Jew is responsible for another one that they should perform a mitzvah. So we see here that every single Jew is responsible for one another. And now we're going to go a little bit further into a deeper explanation of this idea of being responsible. So this word guarantor or responsible is the word in Hebrew, it's arev, ayin resh beis. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe explained a teaching that the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, heard when he went to Mizrich, when he went to his teacher, the Maggid of Mizrich. By the way, if you want to learn about these personalities on our Tuesday class, please, we'd love you to join us as we discover these great personalities. We recently did the Maggid of Mizrich not too long ago. Every Tuesday, God willing, we do a important Jewish historical figure. Okay, so in this teaching, this is the teaching that the Alter Rebbe said as follows. He said, our sages tell us all Jews are responsible for one another, right? This word, arev, arevim zelazeh. The Hebrew word, if we're responsible, is arevim, which has three possible meanings. It can mean responsibility. It can mean, like we said, arvos, right? The word responsibility. It could also mean ta'aroives. It could mean a mixture, intertwined. And it can also mean omesikos. It can mean like arevim, like it's arev, it's sweet. This means that we must consider each of our fellow Jews as sweet, intertwined with us, and people that are responsible for. Okay, and that was the entire teaching. And the Rebbe explained this teaching as follows: that the practical meaning of the sage's teaching in the context of his Jewish law is that every Jew is responsible for their fellow Jew. However, this is not something that is imposed upon us. Before that. Then the reason for that, what is the reason why? Is because we are all intertwined. And however, this relationship of every Jew within another, it's not an imposition. It's something sweet, it's something pleasant, something we enjoy. And he goes further to explain that pleasantness and sweetness are related to the soul's faculty of delight. Delight is the most powerful faculty of our souls. We see this fact that even when something is naturally bad and painful for us, if we insist that it's delightful for us, then it actually becomes delightful. So, and the Rebbe brings this idea from a law in the laws of Shabbos as follows. On Shabbos, we have to eat. Actually, this comes into play next week. If Mashiach does not come yet, we're going to have to fast on Friday. Not tomorrow, 1 week from tomorrow. We're going to have to fast. It's going to be the 10th of Tevis. However, on Shabbos, we are not allowed to fast. So it gets a whole thing. You have to make sure that you right away when you get home from synagogue, you have to make kiddush and eat immediately so as not to fast on Shabbos. So that's where that law comes into practicality. So what's another practicality of this law? Is that if a person, let's say Friday night, had a bad dream. So in the Code of Jewish Law, it says that if a person had a bad dream, and the only way he's going to feel better about it is he is going to fast, as is the custom. So he fasts. That will make you feel better. He's allowed to fast even on Shabbos. Even though on Shabbos, generally, you're not allowed to fast because Shabbos is supposed to enjoy Shabbos. However, why are you allowed to fast if you're supposed to enjoy Shabbos? Because that is the enjoyment. In this person, the only thing that's going to make him feel better is enjoyment. So we see that something that innately is negative, not eating, and it's a painful, distressful. People get angry. What I call it nowadays, hangry. You get all famished because you didn't eat lunch or breakfast. But a person could overcome that because of that's what he's going to enjoy. So we see how enjoyment could make things that are not pleasant. And that is where what the Rebbe is teaching us here. And the Rebbe continues and explains, we see this idea also in another place in Judaism. When it comes to Torah study. Now, in some subjects, some people enjoy some subjects more than others. The Torah tells us that a person, if he wants to study Torah, he should always study Torah in a subject that he enjoys. And in fact, this was, and we see that the idea that the subject that he enjoys will help him overcome whatever barriers there are to study, whether it's a lack of interest or exhaustion, etc. If a person is doing something he enjoys, he could overcome those things. And the Rebbe brings us in many letters that basically a person should pick something to study that he enjoys, and if he let's say gets tired, he should switch subjects. There's a new idea, a new subject, he'll be excited, he'll continue study. And let's say he gets if he gets sleepy, it gives a similar idea. Or if he has a memory problem, a similar idea. If he has a memory, he can't remember what he studies. Okay, so when you get exhausted, switch subjects and you'll be able to remember it better. So we see that something is able to, when somebody is enjoying something, it's able to overcome whatever barriers he has to what he's doing. And we see this, and the Rebbe goes further and explains that we see this idea even in a physical form. And he brings a famous story, and it's from the Talmud in the Tractate Gittin, page 56b. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the leader of the Jewish people in the times of the destruction of the temple. And he basically wanted to meet with the Roman commander, at that time was Vespasian. And it's a whole long story. He had to pretend that he was dead, a whole story. I'm not going to go into the entire story. Basically, he had to pretend that he had died so he could leave Jerusalem, and he goes and he speaks to Vespasian. And he meets with Vespasian, and he says to him, basically, that I believe he called him an emperor, and Vespasian got angry at him. How dare you call me the emperor? I'm not the emperor. In the middle of the conversation, a messenger arrives from Rome and says to Vespasian, "Rise, for the emperor has died, and the nobleman of Rome plans to appoint you as their leader and make you the next emperor." So Vespasian, in the middle of his conversation, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's appointed emperor. At that moment, Vespasian was wearing only one shoe. When he tried to put on the other one, it would not fit. He then attempted to remove the shoe he was wearing, but it would not come off. He exclaimed, "What is this?" Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai reassured him. He said, "Do not be distressed or troubled, for good news has reached you, as it is written in Proverbs 15:30. Good news fattens the bones. Your feet have grown fatter out of joy and satisfaction." Vespasian has said, "What is the remedy? What do I do to put on my shoe?" Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai replies, "Have some with whom you are displeased pass before you, as it is written, a broken spirit dries the bones." In Proverbs 17:22. Vespasian followed his advice, and the shoe went on his foot. So we see here that actually it can affect you physically as well. When you have a good news, something exciting, it can physically affect you. I'm not a doctor or a scientist. I'm sure. I'm not sure. I know that this is also discussed in science and mental health and other things, and how good news, a good spirit, could help medically a person as well. So that our relationship with another Jew should not be shouldn't only be defined by love, or and an intellectual appreciation of our fellow Jews, of our fellow Jew, but really the whole existence of another Jew has to be a pleasurable and enjoyable to us, and this attitude will then automatically translate into intellect and emotions wherever needed. So, and the Rebbe concludes this idea that this way, our intertwine with our fellow Jew is not something we feel forced into. That because we're made part of the Jewish people, okay, I'm a Jew, now I got to take care of all these people. No, it won't just be a fact of life that doesn't influence us, or something we feel we are commanded to, or something we intellectually appreciate. But the intertwine will be something much deeper, beyond intellectual comprehension, a sweetness. And so when we are instructed to express responsibility for our fellow and guarantee them, then we do so happily, and the entire chain works, because the first step is the sweetness. So we have to go. In other words, we have to go. If we want this to work, we have to. Why are we guaranteeing our fellow Jew? Because we're intertwined. Why are we intertwined? Because it's sweet. Because we enjoy it. So it has to first start with sweetness, then intertwinement, and then guarantee. And we see here how important it is that we not just that we see from this week's Torah portion how we are responsible for each other, but this is something that can be this is something that has to be enjoyable. We have to be happy and appreciate the fact that every single one of us are one nation, and we're all unified. We're like one body with like one body with many functions. And when we do that, and we have this pleasure and enjoyment in being a unified unit, then for sure Mashiach will come and will take us to the Holy Land of Israel, and we'll be able to serve God and take care of each other. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a good Shabbos. If you have any questions or comments, put it in the comments section. We love feedback. Put in the comments, and wish you a good Shabbos, and we will see you, God willing, next week.